Okay, when last time we spoke, we had been examining the plot diagram and writing some definitions for the different stages of the plot. But definition is all well and good. It's useless unless you can use it. It's kind of a redundant statement, but let's see what I mean. Jack, in Rikki-Tikki-Tavi, our story for this week, which plot event figures as the climax? Nag or Nagina? Correct. And where does that happen? Perfect. I want you taking notes on application, even if I don't write them on the board. That means that you probably have a list, an analysis of Rikki-Tikki-Tavi. What is the climax of Rikki-Tikki-Tavi? Jack's correct. The plot event, remember plots divided into events, different units. That's what makes up the plot. So you could have notes on Rikki-Tikki-Tavi. Those notes in your literature section. Use them when you write. I would keep it on a different sheet. Why? Because you have one sheet with just plot concepts, just definitions. Then you have another sheet that's application to the story. Those are two different kinds of concepts, even though they're related. Jake? Oh, we're going to bounce back into it in just a moment. So keep them both going. We're bouncing around. Andrea? Rikki-Tikki-Tavi, you're just analyzing it. Analyzing means cutting it apart, seeing its pieces. And the first piece is what Jack identified. The climax is the fight between Rikki and Nagina in the rat hole. Jack, can you defend why your answer is correct? Do you remember the definition of climax? That is true. It's often the most intense, but not always the most intense. I've known some stories that kind of hit their full intensity right at the beginning, and then they're never quite as exciting again. Jasmine, help him out. That's right. It's the plot event that ends the conflict. After that fight between Rikki and Nagina, conflict's over. Why? True. And she can't do that ever again because she's dead. Okay, good enough. Somebody tell me what the initial incident is then. Maxwell.
When he meets them with the snakes in the garden.
Very good. When he first meets Nag and Nagina in the garden, Nagina tries to attack him, and we learn that they have been eating Darzy's eggs. There's your initial incident. Sets up the antagonist. We get a personal conflict. Somebody give me an example of a plot event from the exposition. Silence descends. Caitlin. Very good. They find Rikki-Tikki on the path. Caitlin, defend your answer. Why is this part of the exposition?
Because it's starting out the story and leads up to the climax.
True, but what is introduced at that moment when the family finds Rikki-Tikki? Primarily the characters, yes. We meet the family when they find Rikki-Tikki. Somebody give me an example of a plot event in the rising action. Luke? Excellent, when he kills Nag. Now, why is this rising action instead of climax?
Because it's before the conflict is over.
That's right. The conflict is still there because Nagina is still alive. Right, when he kills Nag in the bathroom at night. Because that makes the conflict more stressful. It's an effort to solve the conflict, but it doesn't fully solve the conflict. Conflict is still going. That's part of the rising action, or what we might call the complication. Let's see. Brandon, remind me of the definition of falling action, please.
When they when
No, don't give me an example yet. Give me the definition, just the abstract definition of falling action. What is falling action?
when the conflict is over.
And just immediate events and consequences. Brandon, can you think of something that happens just right after the fight? Let's turn our books to that page. See if we can find some evidence. Brandon, you've got yours open. What's the last page of the story? 156. Thank you. So 155 and 156 show the events that occur after the fight, the immediate consequences of the fight. Brandon, can you tell me one thing that happens immediately after the fight?
They tell everybody about the news.
Excellent. It's the announcement of Nagina's death. Part of the falling action? Good. This is an immediate consequence of the fight. When, was it Coppersmith? Yeah, Coppersmith, a bird, announces, it's Coppersmith, yeah, announces the death of and the end of the conflict. Yes. Nagina, I apologize. Okay, then what's the resolution? How does the story end? Jake. That's right, and promises to fight any more snakes if they should arrive. That last paragraph or two of the story. Rikki-Tikki-Tavi is a wonderful story for us to study because it so closely obeys this plot sequence. And you can find events that figure into this plot sequence. Now, complication involves a number of events. We've seen one example. Same thing with falling action, resolution, and exposition. Initial incident should be one event, and climax should be one event. But Rikki-Tikki-Tavi demonstrates plot exceptionally. Many plots deviate or mess around with the plot sequence. We're looking at a basic example first. Any questions about that before we move to a different concept? Yes, Karen. The example from Rikki-Tikki-Tavi or the definition of falling action? The example was the Coppersmith announcement of Nagina's death. Other questions? All right, then let's go back into plot concepts. We're going to move off Rikki-Tikki-Tavi. We're going to get back onto that story in a moment, but let's talk about the different types of conflict. Somebody remind me of the different types of conflict we talked about during the pre-assessment. Anthony. Person versus environment, or we might call nature. Yep, nature or environment. What else? Person versus person. Okay, good. Person versus society. Excellent. And the final. Well, internal would be person versus self. So let's give these clearer names. I'm not a big fan of person versus person, person versus self as names, as labels, but you'll see them often. I'd like you to think of a couple different ways of talking about conflict, and I'd like to give you a little bit more of an advanced, mature, kind of college-level way of talking about these. Person versus person conflicts are what type of conflicts? What's the adjective that we would use to describe this conflict? I'm sorry? Speak up. It's a type of external, but I mean just the person versus person conflict. It was on the pre-assessment. Yes, and there's no penalty for paging through your notes to look at that pre-assessment. Nope. Physical is part of the setting. You're on the right track, though, Anthony. That's the kind of adjective that we're looking for. I have a hard time believing that nobody's seeing it since it's very clearly labeled in 2 documents. Thank you, Maxwell. Personal conflicts. We could call it person versus person, or we could call it a personal conflict. I'm teaching you this simply because it's easier to write sentences with the term personal conflict than it is person versus person conflict, which is long, kind of unwieldy, and a little bit confusing. How then did we phrase person versus nature conflicts, Jake? Environmental. And of course you could, I guess, call it natural, but environment is not necessarily part of nature. So the environmental conflict. Karen, what about the society one? That's right. You have a social conflict. And then Caitlin, you kind of got this. We're talking about the person versus self conflict. What do we call that? That's right. I am a big fan of using simple adjectives to describe conflicts. And I will encourage you to do that in your writing. But I'm also preparing you for the next English class and the one after that where teachers, for some reason, for years have been calling it person versus person, person versus self, and so on. Of course, we have another label that we can use. All 3 of these are types of external conflict. And this last one is internal. So we're categorizing. It's a little bit confusing at times, but external, internal, you must question, am I fighting something within myself or something outside of myself? In external conflicts, I'm either fighting another person, fighting an aspect of the environment, or fighting some social rules and traditions. Are we good on those basic ideas? Then let's go to more specific. Whoa, how did that happen? So I'm going to pause you just for a moment. Looks like one of my tiles is out of sequence. There, should be fixed. Four types of conflict. Ian, pick one. Person versus person. Okay, Ian, how would you define person versus person conflict?
Character versus another character.
Okay, good. Can you give an example, either from a story or from real life, of a personal conflict? Tell you what, Ian, let's start with real life. Do you ever have conflicts with your parents? No? Okay, somebody talk to me about conflicts with your parents. Diana.
Morning, I was going out with my mom because she kept waking me up.
Kept waking you up. So you were in conflict with your mother because she was waking you up. Do you have a conflict, Diana, with the entirety of your mother and her entire existence? No, just a part of something that she's doing, right? What does she want? For you to get out of bed and be responsible, right? What do you want? To sleep. So your goals are in conflict with her goals, right? You don't, yeah, because if you get up, you can't sleep, and if you sleep, you can't get up. So you can't both have what you want, right? Either your mother gets what she wants or you get what you want, but you can't both get what you want, correct? So it's not so much that you're in conflict with your mother as your goals are in conflict. Your interests are in conflict. Let's talk about this with Rikki-Tikki-Tavi. There's a personal conflict in the story, right? Tell me about it. Good. Rikki-Tikki-Tavi versus Nag and Nagina. What does Rikki-Tikki-Tavi want?
He wants to kill them.
No. I think that's the way he's going to get what he wants. What does he want? What's valuable or important to him?
He doesn't, well, they were eating their eggs and he doesn't want them in the garden. Like,
Okay, so he wants to protect the bird's eggs. Good. What else does he want? That is correct. What else does he want? Carson. He wants to keep his family safe and probably the families of those birds as well, right? He wants to protect innocent families. That's what he wants. What do Nag and Nagina want? True. Why do they want to kill the family, though? I think there's something more going on there, Max.
A lot of food.
True, true. It's a lot of food, but I think there's something else going on that we might almost respect, Max.
They think that if their family's gone, then Rikki-Tikki will leave, so that they won't get killed by him.
And more importantly, who else won't get killed by him?
Their eggs.
They want to raise their family and protect their family too, right? They even talk about it. They say, because they're questioning, why should we kill this family? And they say, if we kill the family, we get the garden. And if we get the garden, then we can raise our children without having to worry about some crazy mongoose or some guy with a big stick. Well, isn't that, or a shotgun, right? Well, think about it for a moment. Isn't that the interest? They want territory to have a home for their children. What does Rikki-Tikki-Tavi want? Territory so he can have a home for his family. They can't both have it, right? They can't both have that land. I want you to write down this definition to make sure that you're really clear on how to discuss conflict. I used Diana's example of her conflict with her mom, saying that Diana's interests are in conflict with her mother's interests, and they can't both have their way. Same thing with Rikki-Tikki-Tavi and Nag and Nagina. Just made some notes about the application to Rikki-Tikki-Tavi. So if you have that separate sheet of paper with the stages of the plot for Rikki-Tikki-Tavi, you know, what was the climax, what was the initial incident, you might write this down as well. The personal conflict of Rikki-Tikki-Tavi is the protagonist Rikki-Tikki-Tavi, who wants security for his family. That's his interest. That's his motivation. Versus Nag-Nagina, they're the antagonists. They want security for their family. When you look at it that way, the whole thing becomes very interesting. Because then the snakes don't quite seem like the villains, maybe, that they initially seemed. They're parents. And Rikki-Tikki-Tavi kills all their children and then kills them. Isn't it kind of harsh? When you look at that story and you think about it a little bit, you realize that this is a pretty rough story. It's fairly violent, and it rejects the idea that everybody can get along. It says, nope, we can't. Either they die or we die. Everybody got this? I want to use my definitional strategy of really kind of expanding it and talking about it a lot to apply to the others. Who would like to pick another one? Max. Person versus society. Okay. So what would you define as person versus society? No. I'm not sure there is a social conflict in Rikki-Tikki-Tavi. Not one that's very clear. The conflict in Rikki-Tikki-Tavi is primarily personal. There's a little bit of environmental. So what would you define as social conflict? How would you explain it?
Like one person up against other people.
But Rikki-Tikki-Tavi fights at least 3 snakes. Does that mean he has a social conflict? No. So it's got to be something a little bit more. You're on the right track. Not necessarily. If he were fighting 1,000 snakes, it would still be person versus person. Diana. It has to do with the abstract laws or rules. See, these must be different. Personal must be different from social, otherwise there's no sense in having the 2 categories. And they must be significantly different. The difference is that the protagonist, once again, remember, protagonist has goals or interests. You always must figure out what the protagonist wants. And they conflict with the rules or traditions of their society. We do not have a Rikki-Tikki-Tavi example of this. However, can somebody give me an example either from real life or another story that we might be familiar with? Yeah, Jake. Okay, somebody's speeding. Well, this is the difference, though. Hold on. Do you think the speeder rejects speeding laws? Okay, so if I'm speeding down the street, do you think I, Mr. Clarkson, think speeding laws are dumb? No. So people break laws that they agree with, don't they? Yeah. So if I'm speeding, I still agree with the law. I'm just breaking it. That's an even more extreme example. Shooting somebody. So I'll tell you what, let's avoid that sort of grisly extreme version. And Jake, what you've got to realize is not so much that I break a law as that I have a problem with the entire law or rule as it stands. I don't like it. I don't think anybody should have to live by it. That's a social conflict. Maxwell. Good. Okay, a rebellion inside a country. Can we talk about any historical rebellions that seem to have been social conflicts? The American Revolution. So they had a problem with what? How can we see this as a social conflict? I don't think they have a problem with taxes. They had a problem with the approach of taxation. What was that problem? Right, taxation without representation, right? So they wanted democratic participation in the government, and he was doing this through monarchistic means as a king. So yes, you could see that as a social conflict. We have a problem with your rules. And I think that the colonists may have been able to remain colonies if there were democratic reforms and transformations, which George III was not willing to make. Yes. Good, and she disagrees with pretty much all of the rules of the Capitol, right? And we can also talk about, and I think this is a good example, when you how incredibly superficial and cruel people are. They only care about their clothes, their look, and they don't care if they get entertainment from other people dying. She has a problem with that, right? Yeah. So that's a serious social conflict too. Jake. Oh, with the tablelands? Laura Ingalls Wilder piece. I can't remember the title of that one.
Wouldn't that be
Social conflict? It seemed to be more environmental problem. Her rebellion. It's hard to know until we get more of the story, because remember that was an excerpt that they took out. So it's possible that's a developed social conflict. I'm not quite sure. But yes, rebellion from a teenager could be that as well. Could be a social conflict.
is one having like back then how African Americans were discriminated from?
Sure. Traditional and historical struggles against racism, sexism, all of these problems are social conflicts, absolutely. Because usually there are good people on both sides. They just happen to believe in something that may be wrong and needs to be changed. But yes, that's a social conflict. Very good. Oh, also, if you want classic Disney example, it's pretty much the entirety of the film Mulan. That's all just social conflict all over the place, right? We're not getting recognition. You people don't watch Mulan?
I've seen it 20 times.
Thank you. Good. It's a good movie. All right. We've gone through social conflict, personal conflict. Let's just take the last of the externals, environmental conflict. Who wants to try to a clear definition of environmental conflict according to the definitions that we've been working on? No, it's pretty easy once you get the hang of it. Yeah, Max.
Person versus something in the environment.
True. But let's take a look at the definitions you just wrote down for social and for personal. I want your definition of environmental to be similar.
The goals of nature conflict with the goals of a person.
True.
Like if a person's trying to build a building,
Yes.
the environment doesn't want that.
And how would the environment express that it doesn't want that building to stand right there?
By sending a tornado over there.
Okay, a tornado might be a natural function in the environment, right? Tornado happens. Person wants building and life. That's always good too. But let's talk about the building, right? I want building for shelter and property. Natural environment is going to send a tornado. There's your conflict.
Also want it for shelter and environment. And like if it's in the woods and I build it and I take
Animal houses?
yes.
Like beaver dams and nests and stuff? Okay, sure. Same thing. But we're not going to personify them, right? Or are we? We have a woodchuck as our character now. There's only, Max, you did an excellent job. That's exactly what I'm looking for. There's only one little change. Since nature and the environment and this room and this sort of thing don't actually have brains, they can't have goals. So we're just going to change it a little bit. The goals or interests of the protagonist conflict with the natural function of the environment. And a tornado would be a natural function of that environment. And Max, that's an excellent example.
Person versus environment.
Yes, this is an environmental conflict. Yes. Person versus environment. 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 Yes. Person versus environment We have a slight example of an environmental conflict within Rikki-Tikki-Tavi. Does anybody remember what it is? Yes, Maxwell?
Killed by a flood.
That's right. A flood destroyed his home, nearly killed him. It's a minor conflict that's actually more part of the exposition and the setup of his character than it is a part of the regular stage of the conflict. Okay, we've got a tornado. Can we think of any other stories or anything else? Examples, Chad? Okay, up. Up. They're lost in the forest. True. So being lost in a forest could be a person versus nature and environmental conflict. I could see that. I'm trying to think of the rest of that film if there were other.
There's a fire.
What fire?
Remember when he
Beginning
said
of Carl that way.
the
That's
house on
personal
fire?
versus person.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fire.
Why am I forgetting this? Are you forgetting it too?
What?
You've seen the movie?
What
What fire?
What? I don't understand.
Fire. But that's like person versus person.
Oh, that's
Like the bad guy sets the house on fire.
Oh, at the end. Yeah. When he's trying to when he's trying to torch the house at the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the fire. Hold on. The fire would not be a natural function of the environment because it is actually a tool of another character, right? Used to destroy the house. So we're still talking personal conflict. We're not talking environmental conflict at that point. Yeah, I'm thinking fighting that entire landscape. So, good. Okay, now we've got it. In Up, the function of that landscape, the natural topography of the landscape provides challenges for the characters to reach their goal. And what is their goal?
Get Kevin home.
That's right. Squirrel. Luke.
What if it's like one dog, Doug, versus it's like Bunny, dog?
Personal. Personal.
Okay.
Person versus person. It's character versus character. Hey. Doug has an interest in fitting in and being part of a group, right? Which is why he takes to Kevin and what's the old guy's name?
Carl.
Mr. Fredrickson. He takes to them so quickly and he joins them because he's just looking for support, friendship, in a group, right? That's what he wants. What do the other dogs want? To torture him, right? And to kick him out and to make him miserable. So their interests and his interests cannot coincide. And then he finds Fredrickson and Kevin, who seem to have an interest, even though Fredrickson gripes about it, they seem to have an interest in having friends. And so all of their interests coincide, and that's why there's no conflict. Make sense? Good. This is how I want you talking about these things. I don't want you writing a sentence that says, hey, it's Doug versus the other dogs. That doesn't help me. If you say Doug has an interest in this, dogs have an interest in this, they can't both have what they want, that's what brings them into conflict. Now you fully explain what the conflict of the story is. In my experience, students just scratch the surface with explaining what conflict is. And we're going to start doing that tomorrow with the analytical writing. Let's look at the last of the conflicts. Internal conflict, person versus self. Who wants to hazard a guess as to that definition and follow Max's fine example? Bridget.
When a person has a problem with what's going on inside.
Yeah, you're getting to it. Take a look at the definitions that we've written. I want your new definition to follow suit. Sophie.
When the goals of the protagonist conflict with themselves.
Sure, you're totally on the right track. In other words, they've got two sets of goals, right? They've got two goals, and those goals conflict. All of you have multiple goals in this world, multiple things that you want. When you can't have them both, you've got a conflict. The protagonist experiences two goals or interests, but he or she cannot achieve both, or sometimes you might say he or she must overcome a personal failing. And we could talk about it in that way, but I prefer to look at that first sentence. Two goals or interests cannot achieve both. So something of a trick question. In an internal conflict, who is the antagonist? Who's the antagonist in an internal conflict? The protagonist. Yes, Max.
It's like guilt, kind of like.
Could be. Could be guilt, although guilt's more of an emotional experience than it is a conflict. Conflict's a fight, right? If you're fighting your guilt,
Fighting yourself because you did something and you didn't want to do it, you can't go back.
right. So let's say your guilt is interfering with you achieving some new goal.
Such as
Okay. Well, let's say that let's say because of your guilt over something, you are unable to form relationships with other people, right? You're so guilty over something you've done in your past.
you wiped out. You killed
Okay, see, this is... He didn't kill her, though, so there's no guilt.
I was thinking that before you said
He's mourning,
yeah.
right? He's filled with grief over her, so he's experiencing grief. All right, let's talk about Fredrickson. Maybe a little bit of an easier example. It's a little bit complex, but let's see. On the one hand, what does Fredrickson want?
Oh, I know too. I know both the things that he wants.
Go for it, Carson.
Okay, one is to get Kevin back home to his place, but the other one is him to get to Paradise Falls to make Ellie happy. Dead.
But Ellie's scared.
Already at Paradise
Hold on. Put your hand down.
First one's Paradise Falls.
But he's not doing it for her, is he?
He is going to Paradise
She's
Falls.
dead.
He's making
He can't do it for her anymore. She's dead.
No, but he wants to make her happy.
He's doing it for himself.
Yeah, for himself.
Because he feels guilty.
Oh, yeah.
Because he feels guilty.
He promised her.
He feels guilty and he feels overwrought with grief. He's doing it for himself. He's answering that need. Or he's answering his interest in being a good parent figure for Kevin. What do? Do I answer my own guilt and my grief and look at my selfishness and do what I want to do? Or do I sacrifice all of that, throw it away to help this kid? What does he decide?
Yeah.
And that's part of him healing, right? Part of him becoming a better person. Part of him getting back to life. Yeah, it's a good example. Max? Let's go for the self. Let's go for the internal. Hey, shh. Max got an internal example.
In the beginning, like, I can't remember the name of the movie. Like, they paper stuff with time on their wrist. And they, like,
Oh,
they die if they don't. Tron?
no.
I know this one. Yeah, they have a certain amount of
I
time.
know it.
Yeah, I can't remember.
And they don't, like, lock it and stuff.
Okay, hey.
He doesn't take it to his mom in time, and she dies because he has like a ton of it on his wrist from some guy that killed himself.
Okay,
And he didn't get to his mom in time, and he had enough so he could save her.
right.
And
So he has the means to save his mother, but he doesn't.
he feels guilty because of that.
Okay.
Himself, and then the society.
Well, hold on. But how does guilt by itself create a conflict? We saw how it created the conflict with Fredrickson.
Because it was kind of like, it was like the Hunger Games, like he was living in a poor place, and then he wanted to get back at the people that had like enough to live forever.
Right.
And so he ended up, because like, he was talking about his mom, like talking to his mom before, like about the government, and they had good stuff.
It's a dystopia. A dystopia is a word for a future society that's really broken in some way,
Yes.
right? And it's very similar to the Hunger Games. He's on the poor side of things, correct? Fighting against the rich people.
Yes.
Okay, and his mother dies. Right, because he didn't get there in time to save her. How does his grief over that create a problem for him?
Well, it gives him a boost to go after.
Ah, so it's not a conflict, it's actually a good thing, right?
Oh, that's
Oh.
I was using
but it motivates him to act is-
Against the society.
against the society. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
So he's got a social conflict. He has a problem. He has a problem. Much like Katniss does in the Hunger Games. He has a problem with the way that society is separated and how some people suffer and some people do not.
Yes.
Is that correct? And his mother's death is just sort of the initial incident in that conflict,
Yes.
because she dies.
After the,
She dies because of the rules of this society, right?
and then he comes back and with the thing that lasts forever. Is it second coming together? Of course, all the little kids.
Yeah, he sounds like a nice. Yeah, I can't remember. Isn't Justin Timberlake in it? Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember what it's called.
Like if you buy coffee, it's like 60 cents.
Time what? Time in?
No, it's in time.
In time? I know.
We have Google Docs.
Yeah, we have the internet on our wall. Okay, hold on. Shh. Wonderful discussion. Perfect examples, both from real life and from film. And now it'll be time to turn our attention to literature. Next week, or next time, tomorrow, you'll be writing about either Rikki-Tikki-Tavi or the dinner party, something that we've read, and you'll be writing about the conflict, maybe a stage of the conflict, the type of conflict, and so on and so forth. So come tomorrow ready to write.